The morning sky over Washington turned dark at exactly 9:15. Admiral Jake Morrison was drinking coffee in his office when the alerts started blaring across every screen in the building. He dropped his cup and ran to the command center, his heart pounding in his chest. What he saw on the main display made his blood run cold. Massive ships hung in the air above every major city on Earth. They were unlike anything humans had ever built. Each vessel was the size of a small mountain. Dark metal gleaming in the sunlight. They had appeared without warning, without any detection by Earth's satellites or deep space sensors. One moment the skies were clear, and the next, humanity was staring up at an alien armada. Jake grabbed the nearest phone and started making calls. Within minutes, every military base on the planet went to high alert. Fighter jets scrambled into the air, but they looked like insects compared to the alien ships. The vessels just floated there, silent and menacing, waiting for something. Colonel Amy Bennett burst into the command center, her face pale. She had been working in the intelligence division when the ships appeared. She carried a tablet that showed readings from around the world. Every continent had at least 3 of the massive vessels hovering above it. Earth was completely surrounded. The president was already on the video screen, calling an emergency meeting. Jake could see the fear in the man's eyes. Though President Daniel Hayes tried to keep his voice steady, military leaders, scientists, and government officials all joined the call. Nobody knew what to do. Humanity had dreamed of meeting alien life for centuries. But not like this. Then the transmission came. Every television, every radio, every communication device on Earth suddenly displayed the same image. A tall creature stood before them, its skin a deep purple color, with 4 arms and eyes that glowed a faint red. When it spoke, the words came through in perfect English, though the voice was cold and mechanical. The creature identified itself as Ambassador Kreven of the Velkron Empire. It explained that the Velkron had ruled over 400 star systems for thousands of years. They had brought order to the galaxy, it said, and now they had come to bring that same order to Earth. The message was simple and terrifying. Humanity had 30 days to surrender completely. Jake listened to the demands with growing anger. The Velkron wanted Earth to dismantle all military forces, dissolve all governments, and accept their rule. Any resistance would be met with total destruction. Kreven showed images of other planets that had refused. The cities were nothing but rubble. The populations scattered or dead. The message was clear. Submit or die. When the transmission ended, the command center fell silent. Jake looked around at the faces of his fellow officers. Some looked scared, others angry, but all of them looked to him for answers. He was the highest-ranking military officer in the room, and everyone wanted to know what they should do. Amy Bennett spoke first. She had been analyzing the transmission and found something interesting. The Velkron communication had been intercepted and decoded by her team. Behind the official message were other signals, communications between the alien ships. Her team had managed to translate some of it, and what they found was disturbing. The Velkron had already made plans for Earth. They intended to strip the planet of its resources, put humans to work in labor camps, and use Earth as a staging ground for further expansion. The 30-day deadline was not a real negotiation. It was just a way to keep humans calm while the Velkron prepared for occupation. Whether humanity surrendered or fought, the result would be the same. Jake felt his hands forming into fists. President Hayes asked what options they had. The military analysts started running numbers, calculating what Earth's forces could do against the Velkron fleet. The results were not encouraging. Earth's weapons were designed to fight other humans, not aliens with technology centuries ahead of them. A direct fight would end in hours, maybe minutes, but Jake was not ready to give up. He had spent his entire life in the military, defending Earth and its people. He was not about to hand over his planet to invaders without a fight. He started thinking, looking for any possible advantage they might have. Dr. Ryan Clark joined the meeting remotely from his laboratory. He was a quantum physicist who had been working on experimental communication systems. Ryan had an idea. though he admitted it was risky. If they could buy time, he might be able to develop technology that could help them. He needed the Velcron to believe that Earth was cooperating while they secretly prepared to resist. President Hayes made the decision. He would respond to the Velcron and ask for negotiations. He would appear to consider their demands, while the military and scientists worked in secret. It was a dangerous game, but it was the only option they had. Meanwhile, far from Earth, Captain Lisa Monroe was commanding a small exploration ship near Jupiter. Her crew had been studying the ice moons when they picked up a strange signal. It was not from the Velcron fleet. It was coming from deep space. From beyond the solar system, Lisa ordered her communications officer to decode the message. What they found was shocking. It was a warning broadcast on multiple frequencies, meant for anyone who could receive it. The message talked about the Velcron Empire and their methods. It warned other species to resist, to never surrender to the Empire's demands. But the most important part of the message was, at the end. It contained coordinates to a location in the Kronos Nebula, far beyond human-explored space. The message said that species who resisted the V. Jake Morrison stood in the briefing room with his most trusted officers. Only 12 days remained before the Velcron deadline, and every second counted. President Hayes had given him command of a secret mission, one that could change everything or cost them all their lives. The plan was simple but dangerous. Jake would take a small fleet of ships beyond the range of Velcron sensors and make contact with the Resistance Alliance in the Kronos Nebula. He needed to move fast and stay hidden. If the Velcron discovered what he was doing, they would attack Earth immediately. Lieutenant Ben Carter would be his tactical officer. Ben was young but brilliant, with a gift for thinking in ways that surprised everyone. He had already planned 3 different escape routes in case they ran into trouble. Engineer Nicole Hayes would also join them. She had spent the last week modifying their ships with new stealth technology that might keep them hidden from alien sensors. The small fleet left Earth in the middle of the night, using the moon as cover. There were 5 ships in total, each one carrying the best crew members Jake could find. They moved slowly at first, using minimal power to avoid detection. The Velcron ships in orbit did not react. As far as the aliens knew, these were just normal patrol vessels doing routine work. Once they cleared the outer planets, Jake gave the order to increase speed. The ships jumped to faster-than-light travel, leaving the solar system behind. The journey to the Kronos Nebula would take 4 days at maximum speed. 4 days while Earth prepared for what might come. Back on Earth, Amy Bennett was working 20-hour days organizing the resistance. She met with military commanders in secret locations, always moving to avoid Velcron surveillance. The aliens had started sending down drones to monitor major cities. But Amy stayed one step ahead of them. Commander Eric Phillips was in charge of building the underground facilities. He had construction crews working around the clock, digging deep into the Earth. These bunkers would be command centers, weapons factories, and safe havens for civilians if the Velcron attacked. Eric made sure every entrance was hidden, and every tunnel was reinforced. The work was exhausting, but nobody complained. They all knew what was at stake. Dr. Ryan Clark made a breakthrough on the 8th day. He had been studying the Velcron sensor technology, trying to find weaknesses. What he discovered changed everything. Human brain patterns created quantum signatures that Velcron scanners could not properly read. The aliens had never encountered a species like humans before, and their technology was not designed to detect them accurately. Ryan immediately called a meeting with Amy and President Hayes. He explained that if they could amplify this effect, they could make human soldiers and equipment invisible to Velcron sensors. It would not be perfect, but it would give them an advantage the aliens never expected. The president authorized unlimited resources for the project. Ryan assembled a team of the best scientists on Earth and started building what he called the Quantum Shroud. It would be a network of devices that could hide military installations, vehicles, and even individual soldiers from alien detection. Meanwhile, Kate Richardson was training volunteers for guerrilla warfare. She was a former Special Forces operative who had seen combat in a dozen different conflicts. Kate knew that if the Velcron occupied Earth, traditional military tactics would not work. They needed to fight smart, strike fast, and disappear before the enemy could respond. She set up training camps in remote locations, far from cities where Velcron drones might spot them. Thousands of volunteers came to learn. They were teachers, engineers, farmers, and students. They were ordinary people who had decided to become fighters. Kate taught them how to make improvised weapons, how to move unseen, and how to survive behind enemy lines. Major Sam Wright worked with Kate on the training programs. He had commanded troops in several wars and understood that courage alone was not enough. These volunteers needed skills and discipline. Sam made sure every person who left the camps knew how to fight and how to stay alive. On the 10th day, Jake Morrison and his fleet reached the Kronos Nebula. The area was filled with colorful gas clouds that blocked most sensor readings. It was the perfect hiding place. Ben Carter guided them through the nebula, using the coordinates from the mysterious message. What they found inside took their breath away. Hundreds of ships floated in a hidden section of the nebula, representing 7 different alien species. These were the Free Worlds Coalition, refugees and fighters who had escaped Velcron control. A massive ship approached them, and Jake received a communication request. The face that appeared on his screen was not human, but the eyes showed intelligence and purpose. This was Zolrath, a leader among the Terrian people. He welcomed the humans and invited Jake to come aboard. The meeting that followed gave Jake hope for the first time since the Velcron arrived. Zolrath explained that the Coalition had been fighting the Empire for decades. They had learned the Velcron weaknesses, developed weapons that could penetrate their shields, and created technology to disrupt their communications. But more importantly, they had learned that the Velcron could be beaten. The Empire was powerful, but it was also arrogant. They believed no conquered species would ever have the courage to resist after submission. This arrogance made them predictable, and predictable enemies made mistakes. Zolrath offered to share their technology with humanity. In return, he asked Jake to consider joining the Coalition in a larger fight against the Empire. The humans would not be alone in this war. If they chose to resist, they would have allies. Jake did not hesitate. He accepted the offer and spent the next 2 days learning everything he could from the Coalition. Nicole Hayes worked with their engineers, studying new weapon systems and defensive technologies. Ben Carter met with Coalition military commanders, sharing tactical information and learning their strategies. When it was time to leave, the Coalition loaded the human ships with equipment and data. They gave Jake weapons that could hurt Velcron vessels, jamming devices that would blind their sensors, and shield generators that could protect Earth's defenses. Most importantly, they gave humanity knowledge and proof that the Empire could fall. The journey back to Earth seemed shorter. Jake spent the time planning with his officers. They now had the tools they needed, but they still faced terrible odds. The Velcron fleet was massive, and Earth's forces were limited. They would need perfect timing and flawless execution to have any chance of victory. As they approached the solar system, Jake sent an encrypted message ahead. He told Amy and President Hayes what he had found. Help was coming, but Earth needed to be ready. The deception had to continue. The Velcron must believe that humanity was preparing to surrender until the moment the trap. The final 5 days before the deadline moved like a carefully planned dance. Every action, every word, every movement had to look natural while hiding the truth beneath. President Hayes stood before the cameras, his face showing the weight of an impossible decision. Behind him, the symbols of human government stood tall, but his words spoke of surrender. He announced that Earth would comply with Velcron demands. The speech was broadcast worldwide and transmitted directly to the alien ships in orbit. Hayes spoke about protecting human lives, about choosing survival over pride, about accepting a new reality. His voice carried sadness and resignation. It was perfect because part of it was real. He was sad, but not because of surrender. He was sad for what was about to come. Ambassador Kreven received the message aboard his command ship. The alien leader watched the human president's speech with satisfaction. Another species had seen reason and accepted the natural order. The Velcron had conquered hundreds of worlds, and Earth would be no different. Kreven sent a message to his superiors in the Empire. reporting that humanity had submitted without resistance. But while Kreven celebrated, Amy Bennett was executing Operation Silent Night across Earth. Military vessels publicly powered down and moved to designated collection points. The Velcron sensors watched as human warships seemed to accept their fate. What those sensors did not see was that these ships were empty. The real crews had already transferred to other vessels hidden throughout the solar system. Dr. Ryan Clark activated the Quantum Shroud Network at precisely midnight. The effect was invisible to human eyes, but alien sensors suddenly lost track of thousands of military targets. Bases that showed up clearly on Velcron scans simply disappeared. The aliens noticed some interference, but Kreven dismissed it as atmospheric conditions or equipment malfunctions. His arrogance would not let him believe that humans possessed technology the Empire could not detect. Nicole Hayes had spent the last 3 days installing coalition weapons on Earth's hidden fleet. The process was exhausting work, but every ship now carried weapons that could pierce Velcron shields. The arsenal that had seemed useless against alien technology was now backed by firepower that could hurt the Empire. She also modified the stealth systems, combining human innovation with coalition science to create something neither had achieved alone. Lieutenant Commander Laura Stevens coordinated preparations on Mars. The Red Planet had become humanity's backup command center. If Earth fell, the war would continue from Mars and the lunar colonies. Laura worked with Captain Matt Jenkins, who commanded the defense platforms hidden in the asteroid belt. These weapons platforms had been disguised as mining equipment and space debris. The Velcron had scanned them dozens of times and found nothing suspicious. Matt had positioned his forces carefully. Each platform had clear firing lanes to the Velcron fleet positions. When the order came, they would strike from multiple angles simultaneously. The aliens would have seconds to react. And in space combat, seconds meant everything. On Earth, Kate Richardson moved her guerrilla units into position. The Velcron had announced they would land occupation forces on the day after the deadline. They planned to take control of major cities first, establishing their authority over human population centers. What they did not know was that those cities were already evacuated. Amy Bennett had organized the largest civilian relocation in human history. Millions of people had quietly moved from urban areas to underground shelters and remote locations. The process took days of careful planning. People left in small groups, using back roads and hidden routes. Families carried what they could and trusted that they would see their homes again. The cities remained lit and active. Automated systems kept power running and traffic signals working. From orbit, everything looked normal. The Velcron expected to find millions of people when they landed. Instead, they would find empty buildings and Kate's soldiers waiting in ambush. Major Sam Wright positioned his units near the expected landing zones. His soldiers wore the new quantum suits that made them nearly invisible to Velcron scanners. They carried coalition weapons and human explosives. Each squad knew exactly what to do when the aliens landed: strike fast, cause maximum damage, and disappear before the enemy could respond. President Hayes met with Kreven one final time before the deadline. The meeting took place via video transmission. Hayes played his role perfectly, asking questions about the transition process and the treatment of human populations. Kreven answered with false reassurances, promises that meant nothing. The alien leader saw Hayes as defeated and broken. Exactly what the president wanted him to see. After the meeting, Hayes joined Jake Morrison in the secret command bunker buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. This facility had been built during an earlier era when humans feared nuclear war. Now it served as the nerve center for a war against an alien empire. Every military commander on Earth and throughout the solar system connected to this room. Jake reviewed the battle plan one final time. Phase 1 would begin when the Velcron landed their occupation forces. Kate's units would attack the landing sites, while Matt's platform struck the fleet in orbit. Phase 2 would bring the hidden human fleet out of hiding to engage the enemy ships. Phase 3 would call in the Free Worlds Coalition reinforcements that were already moving toward Earth's solar system. The plan depended on perfect timing and complete surprise. If the Velcron realized what was happening too soon, they could destroy Earth before the human fleet engaged them. If the coalition arrived too late, the human forces might already be defeated. Everything had to work exactly right. Ryan Clark monitored the quantum shroud network from his laboratory. The system was holding, keeping Earth's true military strength hidden from alien eyes. But he worried about how long it would last once the fighting started. Energy weapons and explosions might disrupt the quantum fields. He had backup systems ready, but nothing was certain in untested technology. The deadline day arrived. President Hayes gave another speech, this time accepting Velcron rule formally. He signed documents the aliens had prepared, treaties that dissolved human governments and handed control to the Empire. The signing was broadcast across Earth and to the Velcron fleet. Kreven watched with pleasure as the human leader surrendered his world. Within hours, Velcron transport ships began descending from orbit. They headed for New York, London, Tokyo, Beijing, and a dozen other major cities. Each ship carried hundreds of soldiers and the equipment needed to establish occupation authority. The transports moved slowly, confidently, certain that no resistance awaited them. Kate Richardson watched through her tactical display as the first transport settled onto its landing pad in New York. The massive ship's doors opened, and Velcron soldiers marched out in formation. They expected to see crowds of humans waiting under guard. Instead, they found an empty plaza and silent buildings. For a moment, the alien soldiers seemed confused. Their commander barked orders, and troops began spreading out to search the nearby structures. That was when Kate gave the signal. From windows, rooftops, and underground positions, human weapons opened fire. The coalition rifles cut through Velcron armor like it was paper. Aliens fell by the dozens in the first seconds of the ambush. Explosions ripped through their formations as hidden charges detonated. The Velcron tried to return fire, but they could not see their attackers. The quantum suits worked perfectly, making the human soldiers appear as ghosts. Similar scenes played out in every city where the Velcron landed. The occupation force that was supposed to take control of Earth found itself trapped in kill zones with an enemy they could not detect. Kate's unit struck with precision and fury, destroying equipment and eliminating alien soldiers before melting away into the urban landscape. Space burned with the light of 1,000 explosions. Jake Morrison watched from the bridge of the Defender as his fleet tore into the Velcron formation. The aliens had expected an easy occupation, but instead, they faced a coordinated assault from enemies they thought were defenseless. Velcron ships twisted and turned, trying to respond to attacks coming from every direction. The coalition weapons proved their worth in the first minutes of battle. Human missiles that should have bounced harmlessly off Velcron shields instead punched through and detonated inside enemy hulls. Energy beams designed by the Free Worlds Coalition cut through alien armor plating. The Empire's technological advantage vanished in the face of weapons they had never encountered. Lieutenant Ben Carter coordinated the attack patterns from his tactical station. He had studied Velcron combat doctrine during the trip to the Kronos Nebula and found their weakness. The Empire relied on overwhelming force and superior technology. They had no experience fighting enemies who used deception and unconventional tactics. Ben exploited this, sending small groups of human ships on unpredictable attack runs that confused the alien commanders. Nicole Hayes monitored the stealth systems from engineering. The quantum shroud was holding, but barely. Every explosion created interference that threatened to reveal the hidden human positions. She constantly adjusted the quantum fields, keeping the true size of Earth's fleet hidden from Velcron sensors. As far as the aliens could tell, they were fighting a force half the actual size. On Earth, Kate Richardson led her units through the streets of New York. The Velcron ground forces were scattered and disorganized. The ambush had broken their formations, and now human soldiers hunted them through the empty city. Kate's radio crackled with reports from other cities. The story was the same everywhere. The occupation force was being destroyed. A group of Velcron soldiers tried to establish a defensive position in Times Square. They set up energy barriers and heavy weapons, preparing to hold the location until reinforcements arrived. Kate studied their position from a nearby building and smiled. The aliens were thinking like they always did. using superior firepower to control territory. They still had not learned how humans fought. She sent 3 squads around to flank the position while her team created a distraction. Human soldiers fired from the front, drawing Velcron attention. The aliens returned fire with powerful energy weapons that blasted holes in buildings. But while they focused forward, Kate's flanking squads struck from the sides and rear. The Velcron position collapsed in minutes. Major Sam Wright coordinated orbital support from the command bunker. He had direct communication with Matt Jenkins and the defense platforms. When Kate's units needed heavy firepower, Sam called down precision strikes from space. Velcron transport ships trying to land reinforcements exploded before they reached the ground. The Empire's soldiers were cut off, surrounded, and being eliminated. In orbit, the Velcron fleet finally began to organize a response. Ambassador Kreven took direct command of the battle. He had thousands of years of Imperial military history to draw upon, and he refused to believe that primitive humans could defeat the Empire. Kreven ordered his ships to focus their fire, concentrating on one section of the human fleet at a time. The tactic worked. 3 human destroyers exploded under concentrated Velcron fire. 2 more ships took heavy damage and had to withdraw. Jake watched good people die and felt rage building inside him. The Velcron had come to Earth expecting easy conquest. Now they would learn what humanity could do when pushed to the edge. He ordered his fleet to adapt. Instead of engaging in direct combat, the human ships started using hit-and-run tactics. They would strike quickly with their coalition weapons, and then retreat before the Velcron could concentrate fire. Ben Carter used the sensor interference to confuse the enemy, making it seem like ships were in multiple places at once. The battle raged for 6 hours without pause. Both sides took losses, but the Velcron were suffering more. Their fleet had been designed to crush resistance through superior numbers and technology. They had no answer for an enemy that refused to fight the way they expected. Kreven grew increasingly frustrated as his tactical advantages proved useless. On Mars, Captain Laura Stevens watched the battle from the backup command center. Everything depended on holding Earth's orbit. If the Velcron fleet retreated and regrouped, they might return with overwhelming force. The human fleet had to keep them engaged until the Free Worlds Coalition arrived. Laura coordinated with colonies throughout the solar system, making sure everyone was ready if the battle turned against them. Matt Jenkins and his defense platforms had become the backbone of Earth's orbital defense. They moved constantly, using the asteroid belt as cover. His crews had trained for months in these tactics, learning to fight from concealed positions. The Velcron would locate a platform and move to destroy it, only to find the position empty. Meanwhile, other platforms would strike from unexpected angles. One of Matt's platform commanders reported something interesting. The Velcron ships were starting to make mistakes. They were firing at shadows, wasting ammunition on targets that did not exist. The quantum interference was making them paranoid. Every sensor reading was suspect. They could not trust their own eyes, and it was breaking their coordination. Dr. Ryan Clark saw the same thing from his laboratory. The quantum shroud was doing more than hiding human forces. It was creating phantom readings that confused Velcron targeting systems. The aliens were seeing triple the actual number of human ships. Ryan quickly sent the data to Jake, suggesting they could use this to their advantage. Jake immediately understood. He ordered his ships to create even more interference. Human vessels began broadcasting false sensor signatures, making the Velcron think they faced an enormous fleet. The deception worked. Kreven started pulling back, trying to consolidate his forces against what he believed was a massive human armada. That was when the Free Worlds Coalition arrived. Hundreds of ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system. They were not human vessels, but they flew under a common banner. Species that had suffered under Velcron rule had come to help humanity fight back. Zolrath himself commanded the coalition fleet. The Velcron sensors detected the new arrivals, and Kreven finally understood the truth. This was not just a human rebellion. This was a coordinated uprising involving multiple species. The Empire faced enemies on all sides, and for the first time in 1,000 years, a Velcron fleet was trapped. Jake opened a communication channel to Kreven. The alien ambassador appeared on screen, his purple skin darker with anger. Jake spoke calmly, offering the Velcron a chance to surrender. Kreven refused, calling humans primitive and threatening destruction. Jake ended the transmission and gave the order to finish the battle. The combined human and coalition fleet attacked with renewed strength. Velcron ships began to break formation, some trying to flee while others fought to the end. The battle became a rout. Within 2 hours, half the Velcron fleet was destroyed or disabled. The rest scattered, jumping to faster-than-light travel in Despy 6 months after the Battle of Earth. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defender and watched another world gain its freedom. The planet below was called Tarius, homeworld of the Tarian people. For 300 years, the Velcron had occupied this world. Now, as the last Imperial ships fled into space, the Tarian people celebrated their liberation. The campaign had been long and difficult. Jake's combined fleet of human and coalition forces had fought through 43 star systems to reach this moment. Every battle taught them something new about the Velcron and about themselves. They learned that the Empire was powerful but brittle. When faced with real resistance, Velcron commanders made mistakes. Their arrogance became their weakness. Lieutenant Ben Carter had been promoted to captain after the victory at Earth. He now commanded his own ship and led strike forces deep into Velcron territory. His unconventional tactics had become the standard for coalition forces. Hit fast, strike hard, and disappear before the enemy could respond. The Velcron never knew where the next attack would come from. Nicole Hayes had returned to Earth briefly to oversee production of new ships. The Coalition shared all their technology freely, and human engineers combined it with their own innovations. The result was a new generation of vessels that outperformed anything the Velcron had. Earth's shipyards worked day and night, building the fleet that would free the galaxy. On Tarius, Exolrath met with Jake to discuss the war's progress. The Tarian leader looked tired but satisfied. His people were finally home after decades of exile. He told Jake that 70 more systems had risen up against the Empire. The news of humanity's resistance had spread across the galaxy. Species that had suffered under Velcron rule for centuries now believed freedom was possible, but the cost had been terrible. Jake had lost many good people in the fighting. Ships had been destroyed, crews killed, and colonies damaged in the battles. Every victory came with a price. He thought about the soldiers who would never see Earth again, who had died light years from home fighting for the freedom of species they had never met before. Amy Bennett was now in charge of Coalition intelligence operations. She coordinated spy networks across Velcron space, gathering information and finding weaknesses. Amy discovered that the Empire was fracturing. Some Velcron commanders had begun questioning their leaders. The idea that the Empire could lose was spreading fear through their ranks. The war reached a turning point at the Battle of Kronos Nebula. The Velcron sent their main battle fleet to crush the Coalition once and for all. It was the largest force the Empire had assembled in 500 years, 2,000 warships against the Coalition's 800. The odds seemed impossible. Captain Matt Jenkins had been put in command of the Coalition's defensive platforms. He used the same tactics that worked at Earth, hiding weapons in the nebula's gas clouds and using the terrain to his advantage. When the Velcron fleet entered the nebula, they found themselves in a maze of sensor interference and hidden dangers. Jake led the mobile fleet in a series of lightning strikes against the Velcron formation. They did not try to win a direct battle. Instead, they cut off supply lines, destroyed command ships, and created chaos. The Velcron fleet was enormous, but it was also slow and inflexible. Coalition forces moved like a swarm, attacking from every direction. The battle lasted 3 days. In the end, the Velcron fleet retreated with half their ships destroyed or damaged. It was the first time in recorded history that the Empire had lost a major fleet engagement. The defeat sent shockwaves through Velcron space. Systems that had remained loyal to the Empire began to rebel. The Coalition gained dozens of new allies in the weeks following the battle. Kate Richardson had been promoted to general and given command of ground forces. She trained soldiers from 12 different species in guerrilla warfare tactics. Her methods became the standard for fighting Velcron occupation troops. Planets that would have taken years to liberate were freed in weeks using Kate's tactics. Major Sam Wright ran the Coalition's military academy, training the next generation of officers. Students came from every member species to learn combined arms tactics and joint operations. Sam taught them that unity was their greatest weapon. Alone, each species was weaker than the Empire. Together, they were unstoppable. Dr. Ryan Clark continued developing new technology. His quantum communication network allowed coalition forces to coordinate across vast distances instantly. The Velcron had no answer for it. Their jamming systems were useless. Ryan also developed new weapons systems, combining human creativity with coalition science to create things neither could achieve alone. The Free Worlds Coalition grew stronger with each passing month. What began as 7 species hiding in the Kronos Nebula had become an alliance of 32 worlds. They established a governing council where each species had an equal voice. Decisions were made together, and resources were shared freely. It was a new model for galactic civilization, one based on cooperation instead of conquest. Ambassador Kreven sat in a prison cell aboard the Defender. He had been captured during a raid on a Velcron supply depot. Jake visited him sometimes, trying to understand the Velcron mindset. Kreven still believed the Empire would eventually win. He could not accept that conquered species had the right to be free. In one conversation, Kreven asked Jake why humans fought so hard. The Empire would have allowed them to live, to exist under Velcron protection. Jake's answer was simple. Freedom was not something to be given by others. It was a fundamental right that all beings deserved. Humans would rather die fighting than live as subjects. The turning point came when the Coalition reached the Velcron homeworld system. The Empire had ruled from this location for thousands of years. Their capital planet was defended by massive space stations and a fleet larger than anything the Coalition had faced before. It seemed impossible to capture, but Jake did not need to capture it. He just needed to prove the Empire could no longer protect its own home. The Coalition fleet struck the outer defenses and then retreated. They had not come to conquer. They had come to send a message. The Empire was no longer safe anywhere. The psychological impact was devastating. If the Velcron could not protect their homeworld, what good was their power? More systems rebelled. Velcron governors found themselves overthrown by their own subjects. The empire that had ruled for millennia was collapsing from within. President Hayes received a transmission from the Velcron High Council. They wanted to negotiate peace. The empire was offering terms, willing to discuss a settlement. Jake advised caution. The Velcron might be trying to buy time to rebuild their forces, but the Coalition Council voted to hear what the Empire had to say. The peace talks took place on a neutral station. Velcron representatives sat across from Coalition leaders. For the first time, the Empire was negotiating as equals with species they once considered primitives. The discussions were difficult. The Velcron wanted to maintain control of some systems. The Coalition demanded complete freedom for all occupied worlds. Amy Bennett presented evidence of Velcron war crimes during the negotiations. The Empire had destroyed entire civilizations that resisted. They had enslaved billions and stripped planets bare of resources. The Coalition would not accept partial freedom. It was all or nothing. The negotiations lasted for weeks. In the end, the Velcron had no choice. Their fleet was broken, their systems in rebellion, and their economy collapsing. They agreed to Coalition terms. All occupied worlds would be granted independence. The Empire's military would be reduced to defensive forces only. Velcron governors would leave their posts, and free elections would be held on every liberated world. The treaty was signed 6 months and 3 days after the Battle of Earth. Jake Morrison watched as leaders from the Coalition and the Empire put their marks on the document. It was a moment he had never imagined during those dark days when Velcron ships first appeared over Earth. The galaxy changed rapidly after the treaty. Freed species established their own governments. Trade networks formed between Coalition members. The Council of Free Worlds became the foundation for a new galactic order. It was not perfect, but it was built on cooperation and respect rather than fear and conquest. Captain Laura Stevens was chosen to establish the first human embassy on Terrius Prime. She worked with the Coalition to build diplomatic relationships and cultural exchanges. Humans were no longer isolated. They were part of a larger community, connected to species across the galaxy. Kate Richardson continued training Coalition forces, But now they focused on peacekeeping rather than combat. Her soldiers helped maintain order on newly freed worlds and protected against pirates and raiders. The skills she taught were used to defend freedom rather than win it. Commander Eric Phillips oversaw the reconstruction of Earth. The cities that had been evacuated were repopulated. The underground facilities became emergency shelters and storage sites. Earth had survived the war, and now it thrived as a major center of coalition government. Jake Morrison was offered command of the entire coalition fleet, but he declined. He had spent enough time in space. He returned to Earth and retired to a quiet life, but he remained available as an advisor, sharing his experience with younger officers who would protect the peace he had helped create. On the first anniversary of the Battle of Earth, President Hayes gave a speech. He talked about the cost of freedom and the price of peace. He honored those who had died defending humanity and the Alliance. He reminded everyone that freedom was not a gift. It was something that had to be earned and protected. Ben Carter, now an admiral, stood in formation with officers from a dozen different species. They represented the coalition fleet that protected free space. Together, they were stronger than the Empire had ever been. Together, they ensured that no single power could threaten the galaxy again. The Velcron Empire still existed, but it was a shadow of its former self. They controlled only their core systems now, and even there, democratic reforms were taking hold. The conquered had become the free, and the conquerors had learned humility. Jake Morrison sometimes looked up at the night sky and remembered when humanity thought they were alone. Now Earth was connected to hundreds of worlds. Ships from dozens of species visited human space. Children grew up knowing that the galaxy was vast and full of friends and allies. The Empire had planned to rule the galaxy, to add humanity to their list of conquered species. But they had underestimated one crucial thing. They had underestimated the power of beings who refused to surrender their freedom. Humanity and their allies had written their own fate, not with words but with courage and sacrifice, and that fate was freedom, earned through struggle and defended through unity. The galaxy would never be the same. And that was exactly how it should be. Rate escape attempts. Kate Richardson stood in Times Square, watching the sky above New York. The Velcron ships in orbit were gone, destroyed or fled. Her soldiers had won the ground battle. The occupation force was eliminated, and Earth remained free. She allowed herself a moment to breathe, to feel the weight of what they had accomplished. But the war was not over. Earth had won this battle, but the Velcron Empire was vast. They would return with more ships, more soldiers, more firepower. President Hayes knew this. Jake knew this. Every human who had fought knew this. The question now was what humanity would do next. Jake Morrison gathered his commanders for a conference. The Free World's coalition leaders joined them. For hours they discussed strategy and options. They could defend Earth and wait for the Empire to strike again, or they could take the fight to the Velcron. The decision was not easy. In the end, it was Amy Bennett who spoke the truth everyone was thinking. The Velcron would never stop. They would send fleet after fleet until Earth was conquered or destroyed. The only way to truly protect humanity was to destroy the Empire's ability to make war. They had to strike at Velcron-held systems, free the occupied worlds, and break the Empire's power. It was an enormous task. The Velcron controlled hundreds of systems, but they had shown that the Empire could bleed. They had proven that the Velcron were not invincible. With the coalition as allies and the element of surprise, they had a chance. President Hayes authorized the offensive. Humanity would not wait for the next attack. They would carry the fight to the Empire. In orbit, the Velcron commanders realized something was wrong when they lost contact with their ground forces. They tried to scan the cities below, but found their sensors jammed by interference they could not explain. Kreven ordered more troops to launch, intending to overwhelm whatever resistance had appeared. That was when Matt Jenkins opened fire. The hidden defense platforms revealed themselves and launched everything they had at the Velcron fleet. Missiles and energy beams caught the aliens completely by surprise. 3 ships exploded in the first volley. Others activated their shields, but the coalition weapons punched through them. Jake Morrison gave the order, and the human fleet appeared. Ships emerged from behind asteroids, from Jupiter's shadow, and from deep space positions. They had been waiting for this moment. And now they struck with everything they had. The Velcron fleet found itself surrounded by enemies that should not exist, fighting with weapons that should not work. The battle for Earth had begun, and the Empire's plans for easy conquest died in the first minutes of combat. Was sprung. Amy received the message and felt relief wash over her. They had a chance now. A real chance. She immediately began the next phase of the plan. Military units started moving to hidden positions throughout the solar system. Ships were relocated to the asteroid belt, behind Jupiter's moons, and in deep space locations where Velcron sensors would not find them. Ryan Clark and his team worked day and night to complete the Quantum Shroud network. They installed the devices on military bases, ships, and equipment. When activated, Earth's true military strength would become invisible to the aliens watching from orbit. Commander Eric Phillips reported that the underground facilities were ready. They could house millions of people if needed, and the production lines for weapons and ammunition were already running. Earth was preparing for war while pretending to prepare for peace. Kate Richardson sent her trained volunteers to positions across the planet. They would be the ones who fought in the cities if the Velcron landed troops. Every person knew their role and was ready to act when the signal came. With only 2 days left before the deadline, President Hayes prepared to give a speech that would fool the Velcron into thinking Earth had given up. It would be the performance of his life, and the future of humanity depended on making it convincing. Jake Morrison returned to Earth and took command of the hidden fleet. Everything was in place. The trap was set. Now they just had to wait for the Velcron to walk into it. Elcron had gathered there, forming an alliance to fight back. It was an invitation and a lifeline. Lisa immediately sent the message back to Earth. Jake received it within hours and felt something he had not felt since the Velcron arrived. Hope. They were not alone in this fight. Others had faced the Empire and survived. If humans could reach this alliance, they might have a chance. Amy Bennett started organizing resistance cells across Earth. She contacted trusted officers in every country, people who would fight rather than surrender. These groups would prepare in secret, gathering weapons and supplies, building hidden bases underground where the Velcron sensors might not detect them. Jake looked at the alien ships still hovering over Earth and made a silent promise. The Velcron thought they had already won. They thought humans would break under the threat of destruction, but they did not understand humanity. They did not know that humans had fought and struggled for everything they had ever achieved. Earth had survived world wars, natural disasters, and countless challenges. They would survive this too. The 30-day countdown had begun. But so had humanity's preparation for the fight of their lives. The Velcron Empire had planned to rule the galaxy, but they had made one critical mistake. They had given humans a choice, and humans had chosen to write their own fate.